Each year, the Thayer School recognizes a graduate or friend of the Thayer School with the Robert Fletcher Award, given in recognition of distinguished achievement and service in the highest tradition of the school. When Robert Fletcher was selected by General Sylvanus Thayer and Dartmouth President Asa Dodge to become Thayer School's first professor and dean in 1870, he was a 23-year-old Army lieutenant serving as an assistant professor of mathematics at the U.S. Military Academy. Over the ensuing 65 years of service to Thayer School, Fletcher was to leave a strong, lasting impression on generation after generation of students. His accomplishments as director and teacher almost invariably merged in the minds of students with his quality as a human being. As Sylvanus Thayer was the father of the Military Academy, so was Robert Fletcher the father of the Thayer School. The individual selected to receive Thayer School's Robert Fletcher Award must possess the qualities exemplified in the life and work of this remarkable individual, who for more than 40 years contributed not just to the Thayer School, but as president and engineer of the Hanover Water Company, a member of the New Hampshire State Board of Health, and many other activities contributing to the prestige of the school, the betterment of community, and the advancement of engineering education. Today, we present the Robert Fletcher Award to Dr. Robert S. Langer, the David H. Koch Institute Professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Langer is a chemical engineer by training, whose passion for discovery and service has yielded more than 500 patents and more than 40 products that are either on the market or in the FDA-approved pipeline. Many of the products developed in Professor Langer's lab involve new types of biomaterials, beginning with poric plastic implants for drug release and progressing into such diverse fields as DNA delivery for gene therapy, intelligent drug release, and cellular systems. Through his work, Professor Langer has helped invent the twin fields of controlled drug delivery and tissue engineering. While well known as an inventor, Professor Langer is also dedicated to the Academy and has served on the MIT faculty since 1977, all the while working to blur the lines between engineering and medicine. He is a joint faculty member in 3 MIT graduate programs and draws students from an even greater variety of departments, with at least 10 different disciplines represented in his laboratory today. By the National Academy of Engineering in 2002, Langer was awarded the Charles Stark Draper Prize, considered engineering's equivalent of the Nobel Prize, for his work in the bioengineering of revolutionary medical drug delivery systems. He is one of only a few people, and the youngest ever, to have been elected to all 3 United States National Academies, the National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine. Bob, today it is my great pleasure to present you with Thayer School's highest honor, the Robert Fletcher Award, for your achievement as an educator, a scientist, and an inventor, and your passion for helping people and improving the human condition. Congratulations.
Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be here this morning, and I want to congratulate all of the students and all of your families. Graduating college, particularly such a great school as Dartmouth, is a huge milestone, and you all deserve to be incredibly, incredibly proud. So I was trying to think about what I wanted to say this morning and what kind of messages to leave with you, and I thought I wanted to mention two messages. One, to try to dream big dreams, dreams that you think can change the world and make it a better place. But secondly, I think what you'll find, and I'll try to illustrate this in my own life in a minute, is sometimes things don't always work out the way you plan. Things start to look bad a little bit, and the second part of my message would be, no matter how bad they look, don't give up on those dreams. As you heard the dean give the introduction to me, you might think, well, gee, you graduate college and you invent all these things, you get all these awards, and it's easy. And you might think that as you look at lots of adults. But I thought what might be useful this morning is just for me to share with you some of my own struggles and decisions when I was a young engineer to illustrate some of these points. So when I graduated college in chemical engineering, perhaps like some of you, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do career-wise. In my case, I graduated in the 1970s. And the parents in the audience might remember that in the 1970s, just like a year or two ago, there was sort of this supposed energy crisis. But in the 1970s, it's even worse, because not only do the prices of gas keep going up, but if you had a car, at least in the Boston area, what I found is if you had a car and you wanted to get gas, you'd actually wait in line for 2 hours to get the gas. But the one good thing about that is that if you were a chemical engineer, you got lots of job offers. In fact, pretty much every one of my classmates in the 1970s joined oil companies because they had so many openings and they paid enormous amounts of money. And I thought, actually, at first glance, that's what I wanted to do too. So I actually applied to all these oil companies, and I got over 20 job offers from different oil companies, 4 actually from Exxon alone. I also got job offers from Shell and Chevron and all these other oil companies. In fact, I think the only one that didn't offer me a job was British Petroleum. I actually didn't apply there. I think they didn't come to MIT. But one of these job interviews made quite an impression on me. I went to this interview at Exxon in Baton Rouge, and while I was there, one of the young engineers said to me that if I could just increase the yield of this one petrochemical by 0.01%, he said, wouldn't that be wonderful? He said that would be worth billions and billions of dollars. And I remember flying home to Boston that night thinking to myself, I really don't want to do that. And I started thinking, it was actually very helpful to me. I started thinking, well, that's good. The interview showed me what I didn't want to do. And I started thinking what I did want to do more and more. And one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was use my education in engineering to help improve people's lives. And when I was a graduate student, one of the things I did was help start a school for poor kids, where I would develop chemistry and math curricula. And one day I saw an ad in one of the journals for an assistant professor at City College in New York to develop chemistry curriculum. So I wrote them a letter applying for a job, but they didn't write me back. But I liked the idea. I liked that idea of doing that. So I looked for all the ads I could find for assistant professor doing like chemistry education development. And I found about 35 schools that had openings. And I wrote all of them, but none of them wrote me back. You know, I think if you're not in the right box, engineering didn't, I guess, fit chemistry education. So then I thought about another way that I might be able to help people, and that was by doing health-related research. So I applied to a lot of hospitals and medical schools. They didn't write back either. And then one day, one of the people that was in the lab that I was at said I should write to this man, Dr. Judah Folkman at Harvard, because this person in my lab said sometimes Dr. Folkman hired unusual people. So I took what at that time seemed like to all the engineers I knew like a huge risk, and I began doing postdoctoral work in a hospital. Now that might seem more common today, but at that time no chemical engineer had ever worked in a surgery lab before. And I began working on 2 different kinds of problems. One was to try to see if I could actually find the first substance that could stop cancer blood vessels and hopefully therefore stop cancer. And secondly, because it was important for that project, to see if I could develop plastics that could slowly deliver these substances and other substances for a really long time in the body. And before I began working on this, no one had been able to do that. And in fact, most scientists and the literature said it was actually impossible to do. In fact, really the only thing I had going for me is I just didn't know that. So I actually spent 2 years working on this project, and I actually found over 200 different ways to get it to not work. But finally, I figured out a way to modify these plastics and use them to slowly release these molecules, and that not only helped us do that, but it also enabled us to find the first substances that stop these cancer blood vessels and help stop cancer. Well, about 2 years after I started working on this, I got asked to give a talk, a lecture, on this to a very distinguished audience of engineers, actually, in Michigan. And I'd never given a big talk before. Well, actually, one time in 8th grade, I actually did get to give a 1.5-minute speech. And I maybe should just a little bit about that talk. So in 8th grade, what I did is the night before the talk, I wrote the talk out, and I stood in front of my parents' mirror, and I recited it for 4 straight hours. And the next day, I stood up in front of my 8th grade class, and I didn't take up my write-up or anything. I stood up in front of the class, and I recited it. And I was doing okay for the first minute and 2 seconds, and then I could not remember the next word. So I stood up in front of my 8th grade class. For another minute, I just frozen. I couldn't say anything. And finally, the teacher told me to sit down and didn't give me a particularly good grade. I think it was an F. So now when this Michigan talk came about many years later, I was very nervous, so I stopped working about 2 weeks in advance of it. I kept practicing my talk over and over into a tape recorder. They didn't have VCRs then. And until the day finally came when I was going to give the talk. So I got up and I gave the talk, and I'd say by the end of it, I thought I did all right. I didn't forget too much of what I was going to say. I didn't stammer too much. So I thought when I was done that all these older engineers, being nice people, would want to encourage me, this young guy. But when I was done, many of the engineers came up to me and they said, we don't believe anything you just said. They said, we know it's scientifically impossible to get these molecules through plastics. And it wasn't until several years later that people began repeating what we did that the question shifted to how could this possibly happen. In fact, I spent a good deal of my early career at MIT understanding how these systems work and then making it useful for a number of different medical applications. Also, shortly after this talk, I tried to receive grant money, funding, to support my research, so I wrote a number of grants. In fact, my first 9 grants were turned down. Not a very good track record. I remember I wrote one grant in particular to the National Institutes of Health for some of the cancer research I was doing, and I got the reviews back, and they were very, very negative. They not only turned me down, but they said, well, how could Dr. Langer do this? He's an engineer. He doesn't know anything about biology, and he must know even less about cancer. Well, when I was done with this postdoctoral work, I also applied for faculty positions to a number of chemical engineering departments. But I actually had trouble getting faculty jobs at the time because people felt that the work that I was doing actually wasn't engineering. They thought it was more biology. So I ended up joining what was then the Nutrition and Food Science department. But in that department, what happened was, the year after I got the position, the guy who hired me decided to leave. So a number of the senior faculty in the department decided to give me advice. They told me I should start looking for another job. So there I was, getting my grants turned down, people not believing in my research, and having little hope of keeping my job. And it was actually the lowest level academic job you could have. But I was fortunate, however, that within a year or two, scientists in the pharmaceutical industry started using some of the principles, and even some of the inventions I'd made, and things began to turn around. And eventually, I even did get to keep my job and get promoted. More importantly, I like to think that the discovery we've made, both in cancer and in drug delivery and biomaterials, have helped improve the lives and health of millions of people. So when you graduate, the path you follow may often be confusing, often unclear, and sometimes actually scary. It certainly was for me. But I hope you will all dream big dreams about how you can do things to help people and to improve the world. But there may be many times when you try to do something like trying to develop a new product, create a new engineering principle, start a new company, whatever your dream is, that people will tell you it's impossible, that it'll never work, and that it will never happen. But I think that can be very rarely true. I think if you really believe in yourself, if you really stick to things and work very, very hard, there's very little that's truly impossible. I wish all of you the very, very best in your futures. Congratulations.